Imagine this. You're sitting across from her at a cafe. You've bought the drinks. You've smiled until your cheeks hurt. You've asked her about her day, her friends, her dreams. You've tried so hard to be charming that you can feel the sweat under your collar. But the more you lean in, the more she leans back. Her eyes dart to the window. Her hand scrolls her phone. Her energy fades. And you leave that table feeling drained, invisible, and humiliated. What went wrong? You were polite. You were nice. You gave approval at every step. Yet the truth is, brutal approval doesn't make you magnetic. It makes you replaceable. Respect does. The world has lied to you about confidence and charisma. They told you women want sweet words and constant validation. They told you to keep the peace, to avoid conflict, to always show her how much you care. But that advice left you neutered in her eyes. Because respect is born from boundaries. Charisma is born from indifference to approval. And confidence is nothing more than the quiet certainty that you don't need anyone's permission to exist. Think back. How many times have you over-explained yourself in a text because you feared she might misread your silence? How many times have you stayed up at night, typing paragraph after paragraph, justifying why you didn't reply sooner? You thought you were keeping her comfortable. What you were really doing was announcing, "My validation depends on yours." That's not confidence. That's submission dressed as courtesy. Here's the truth. Most men choke on women don't respect men who seek their approval. They enjoy the attention. They enjoy the ego boost. But deep inside, they lose attraction. Why? Because approval seeking is weakness. And weakness in the arena of attraction is a silent death sentence. Let me give you a scenario you've probably lived. She pulls away. Maybe she takes hours to reply. Maybe she suddenly becomes busy. And you, panicked, think the solution is to chase. You send more texts. You add more emojis. You call. You want to fix the distance. But what you don't see is this. The distance is the test. She's measuring whether you collapse without her. The man who panics fails. The man who waits, who stays grounded in his world, who doesn't need her energy to function, he passes. That is how respect is earned. Charisma doesn't come from performing. It doesn't come from talking louder, dressing better, or memorizing lines from some dating coach's script. Charisma is a force field created by one thing: your refusal to beg for acceptance. When you look at a woman and she knows, deep in her gut, that you'd like her attention but you don't require it, that's charisma. It's subtle, but it's undeniable. Practical application the next time she delays a response. Stop rewarding it with pursuit. Match her investment. If she gives you one line after 4 hours, give her one line after 4 hours. Don't argue, don't explain, don't complain. Indifference is power. Because while approval seeks to hold on, respect allows you to walk away. And walking away first, without fear, is the nuclear weapon of male confidence. You've been conditioned to think that women will leave if you don't bend. But look closer. They leave when you bend too much. They drift when you drown them in reassurance. They test you not to see if you'll fail, but to see if you'll stand. And here's the paradox: the less you seek their approval, the more they're drawn to you. So here's your reality check. Every time you try to prove yourself to a woman, you bleed power. Every time you explain instead of decide, every time you seek comfort instead of holding frame, you lose respect. Confidence isn't about volume, it's about stillness. Charisma isn't about jokes, it's about presence. And respect is the currency of attraction. Without it, you're just another man orbiting her attention like a planet begging for sunlight. Have you ever recognized yourself in this exact situation? What happened next? Which one of these approval-seeking behaviors has cost you the most respect? What's the hardest part for you about staying silent when you feel her pulling away? You've probably felt it before, that crushing silence after you've said too much. You sent the long text. You gave the over-detailed explanation. You poured your feelings into the air and she responded with a single okay, not angry, not warm, just flat. That silence cuts deeper than any insult. And here's the truth you need to hear every time you over-explain, every time you try to convince her of your value. You're not gaining points. You're bleeding authority, because men who command respect don't campaign for it. They assume it. Think about the last time you walked into a room and immediately noticed the guy who didn't need to speak. He sat back, relaxed, completely comfortable in his own presence. When he finally did say something, everyone turned to listen. That's not because he was smarter or better looking than the rest. It's because his energy wasn't desperate. His confidence didn't scream. It whispered. That's charisma. And it doesn't come from trying to be liked. It comes from being unafraid of being disliked. Now compare that to the guy who laughs too loud at every joke, who interrupts himself with nervous chuckles, who agrees with everything just to avoid tension. He's exhausting to be around. Women don't respect him, not because he's unkind, but because he's terrified of disapproval. And a man who fears disapproval is a man who can be controlled. Here's a field-tested truth women will push you to see where your limits are. It's not always malicious. Sometimes it's instinct. She might cancel plans last minute, throw a sarcastic jab, or act distant without explanation. You'll be tempted to patch it up with gifts, apologies, or a flood of reassurance. Stop. That is the trap. The right response is to let her behavior speak for itself and decide whether you'll tolerate it. If you cave, she learns you have no spine. If you hold steady, she learns your respect cannot be bought with her mood swings. This is where most men fail. They think, if I show her I care more, she'll see I'm different. But caring isn't the problem. Over-investing is. If you're pouring gallons of energy into a woman who's giving you drops, you're starving yourself. You're trying to build respect on a foundation of begging. Respect can only be built on balance. So how do you shift? Start with this match. Don't chase. If she gives effort, mirror it. If she pulls away, don't sprint after her shadow. If she crosses a line, calmly state your boundary once, and then act on it. You don't need to argue. You don't need to explain. You need to act. Because women don't respect what you say. They respect what you enforce. Picture this, she says she's too busy to see you. But you notice she has time for friends and Instagram stories. Instead of whining, you shrug. You fill your time with your own life, and you stop rewarding her absence with attention. A week later, she's messaging you again, curious why you didn't chase. That's not an accident. That's the psychology of respect. You showed that her validation wasn't oxygen for you. You showed that your time was valuable with or without her. And suddenly, your presence feels like a privilege instead of a given. This is why indifference is magnetic. It doesn't mean you don't care at all. It means you're immune to manipulation. You're not moved by cold shoulders. You're not seduced by crumbs of attention. And you're not broken by temporary distance. That kind of man is rare. That kind of man women call confident without being able to explain why. Confidence isn't about pretending. It's about proving to yourself that you can survive rejection, silence, even abandonment, without losing yourself. That is the brutal truth most men avoid. They want love without risk. But respect only grows when you show you're willing to lose her rather than lose yourself. So ask yourself this: have you been the man who explains himself into weakness? How many times have you tried to repair a woman's bad behavior instead of letting her feel the loss of your presence? And what's scarier for you, her disapproval, or the idea that you might finally walk away and never look back? Some women will never say it out loud, but they're addicted to the game of pulling away and watching how you react. It's not always conscious, but it's real. She goes cold for a day. She ignores your message. She posts something that makes you wonder if she's talking to another guy. And inside you, the panic rises. You feel that urge to explain, to check in, to prove your worth before she slips away. That panic is exactly the lever she can pull to control you. The moment she learns your emotions are tied to her silence, she owns you. But here's the brutal truth. Her silence is not an emergency, it's a test. And every man who fails it by chasing only teaches her one thing, that he's desperate for approval. The man who passes doesn't react. He doesn't send 10 follow-ups. He doesn't scroll her stories at 3 a.m. He carries on with his life, his schedule, his mission, and that indifference resets the balance instantly. Because the woman realizes she can't yank his strings. He's unshaken. Think of it like poker. The weak player shows every card in his hand, hoping to convince others he's strong. The strong player keeps his face still, his body calm. He doesn't need to talk because his silence makes the other side wonder. Dating works the same way. When you explode with approval and panic every time she withholds attention, you've already lost. When you sit still, when you refuse to perform, you create the mystery that forces her to step toward you. Let me tell you how this plays out in real life. A guy spends weeks texting a girl non-stop. She loves the validation, but one day she slows down. He panics. He doubles his messages. She disappears entirely. Another guy, he texts her once. She delays, and he doesn't respond for a day. She feels the gap, the uncertainty, and she reaches back out. The difference isn't looks or luck. It's that one man taught her he can be manipulated, and the other taught her he cannot. Here's your practical strategy the moment you feel that panic to fix the silence. Stop, ask yourself, am I responding to her or to my own fear? If it's fear, don't move. Wait. If she's truly interested, she'll circle back. If she doesn't, she wasn't yours to begin with. But the key is this: you must train yourself to feel the discomfort without reacting. That's where respect is built, not in the easy moments, but in the tension where most men fold. Understand something deep. Women don't remember every gift, every compliment, every sweet gesture. They remember the men they couldn't control. That's the man who stays in their mind years later. That's the man who, even if it didn't work out, they'll still talk about with respect, because he was unmovable. So stop thinking charisma is about learning clever lines. It's about training your nervous system. When you can sit in that silence, when you can look her in the eye and not flinch when she tests you, when you can let her pull back and not collapse, that's when you radiate power. You're showing, without words, that you're not negotiating your value. This is what women mean when they say, he's confident. It's not the car. It's not the job title. It's not even the six-pack. It's the refusal to beg. And that refusal transforms respect into attraction. Now, I want you to reflect honestly. Have you ever been hooked by her silence and tried to fix it with approval? How many times have you chased harder just because she pulled away? And what would it look like if, instead of chasing, you sat still and forced her to face the possibility of losing you? There's a moment every man faces that defines him, the crossroads between bending to be liked and standing tall to be respected. Most men crumble at that fork. They think approval is safer, easier, less risky. They think if they keep her happy, if they never disagree, If they smooth out every rough edge, she'll stay. But what happens? She grows colder. She gets distant. She looks at him the way someone looks at wallpaper, barely noticing it anymore. Because approval is boring. Respect is magnetic. You've probably seen it with your own eyes. Two men walk into the same room. One is dressed well, smiling, shaking hands with everyone, showering compliments like candy. The other man doesn't smile unless he means it. He speaks less. But when he does, people lean in. The women in the room gravitate toward him, not because he's trying harder, but because he's trying less. One man chases approval, the other carries respect. And the difference is night and day. Women are wired to sense this difference within seconds. They read your posture, your tone, your reaction to tension. If she teases you, do you laugh nervously and rush to defend yourself? Or do you smirk, hold eye contact, and let the silence hang? That split-second reaction tells her everything she needs to know. One response says, "I need you to like me." The other says, "I don't care if you do." And the brutal truth is attraction lives in the second response. Here's the trap you've been taught, that being a good man means being agreeable. But agreeable men rarely hold respect. Why? Because they trade their backbone for acceptance. They silence their opinions to avoid conflict. They nod when they want to disagree. And little by little, they lose the very essence that creates desire. Women may keep them around for comfort, but they never crave them. Let's cut to strategy. The next time you feel that urge to nod along just to avoid rocking the boat, pause, say what you actually think calmly, firmly, without apology. You'll feel the tension rise in the air. That's good. That's where respect is born. Because a man who can stand in disagreement without flinching shows he's not chasing approval. He shows he values his own perspective more than her temporary comfort. That is the seed of charisma. Consider this scenario. She mocks your ambition, maybe calls your goals unrealistic. The approval-seeking man laughs nervously and says, "Yeah, maybe you're right." Respect dies in that instant. The grounded man looks her in the eye and says, "That's fine. You don't have to see it. I will. No anger, no debate, just conviction." That's the line she'll remember. That's the moment she knows she can't break you. And here's what's counterintuitive when you stop chasing approval. You free yourself from the emotional leash. Her opinion loses its power to control you. That doesn't mean you become cold or cruel. It means you become unshakable. And that unshakable presence is what creates the aura people call charisma. You don't even need to talk much. Your silence, your stillness, your refusal to bend does the talking for you. But make no mistake, this path isn't easy. It demands you confront the part of yourself that craves validation like oxygen. It forces you to stand in the storm of her withdrawal, her sarcasm, her tests, and not collapse. Most men can't do it. That's why most men remain invisible. The few who master it become unforgettable. So let me ask you, have you been the agreeable man who lost himself just to keep her approval? Have you ever bitten your tongue so hard you felt invisible in your own relationship? And if you finally spoke your truth without fear, how different would the way women see you be? There comes a point where you realize the real cost of chasing approval. You don't just lose her respect, you lose yourself. You become a watered-down version of the man you were meant to be. Every time you bend to avoid conflict, every time you over-explain, every time you chase when she pulls back, you chip away at your own dignity. Until one day you wake up and you don't even recognize the man in the mirror. You're exhausted, bitter, and invisible. And here's the twist. The woman you bent over backward to please is long gone. Respect beats approval because respect lasts. Approval is temporary. It fades the moment you stop feeding it. Respect is permanent once it's earned. It lingers even if she's no longer in your life. That's why the men women talk about years later aren't the ones who showered them with constant attention. They're the ones who stood firm, the ones who walked away first, the ones who showed through action that their value was non-negotiable. This is the final shift you need to make. Stop treating her acceptance like oxygen. Stop living in fear of disapproval. Start seeing yourself as the prize. Because when you carry yourself as a man who doesn't need to be chosen, you become the man who gets chosen. That is confidence. That is charisma. That is respect. Here's a practical strategy to lock this in the next time you feel that desperate urge to win her back with approval. Pause and ask yourself, what would the man I respect the most do right now? Would he chase, would he explain, or would he stand silent, unbothered, and ready to walk if his presence wasn't valued? The answer is obvious. Your job is to act on it. You must become comfortable with loss. Because the paradox of attraction is this: the more willing you are to lose her, the more she fears losing you. That's the gravity shift. That's when the games stop. That's when the tests collapse. And that's when she finally sees you not as a man begging for approval, but as a man commanding respect. And understand this clearly, not every woman will stay. Some will run because they can't control you. Let them, because every time you let go of someone who doesn't respect you, you carve more space for the woman who will. Approval seekers cling. Respect-driven men release. That is the difference between living desperate and living free. She may cry, she may scream, she may pull away in silence. None of it matters if you remain unshaken, because your power doesn't come from her reaction. It comes from your refusal to betray yourself. That's the brutal truth most men never accept, but if you do, you become untouchable. So remember this one line: she didn't break you. She revealed what you were too afraid to protect. And now you know better. Protect it. Always.